Right, folks, welcome to this meeting. We've started the recording, so there we go. Just to remember that we are a recording. It is an official meeting. Only use the chat as and when for official kind of amendments or notification of any change of any kind. Apologies, I don't think we have any apologies. We're all here. A declaration of interest, so I'll just read the standard one out. Members are asked to consider whether they have an interest to declare in relation to any item on the agenda for this meeting. Any member making a declaration of interest should indicate whether it's financial or non-financial and include some information on the nature of the interest. Okay.
I'll declare an interest. Item 5, I undertake work for the Housing Department in Nairn, but it's so remote that it does not affect the implications on the paper.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're moving on now, and we have Roddy here. I think, yes, he's disappeared off my screen. He's just here, he comes back again. And Roddy, you are here to give us the update on Scottish Fire and Rescue Committee performance report. Okay, so over to you, Roddy.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. As stated, I'm Roddy Chapman from Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. I'm Station Commander for Badenoch, Strathspey and Nairn. So thank you for inviting me to update you on the local key priorities as identified in the Nairn Area Community Plan and shown on the second page of the performance report. So accidental dwelling fires within the reporting period. If I can refer you to the third page of the performance report headed All Accidental Dwelling Fires, you will notice that the figure for fires has increased from the previous year, with 5 instances of this type across the whole of the year, with a spike in the last quarter of 3 in March. This is not seen as a localised trend, as fires of this type have increased across Scotland for the same period. The incidents in March can be attributed to negligent use of equipment, a faulty electrical appliance, a domestic appliance there, and spread from an external structure. So that was the causes of the fires that we experienced there. There have been no fire fatalities, as illustrated on page 4, and page 5 also reports 0 fire casualties, which are those who have received treatment for smoke inhalation at any incident. The few incidents that have occurred are unfortunate, but they are avoidable. Our local managers and crews are committed to driving down and keeping down incidents of this type and continue to offer home fire safety visits across the area in partnership with other agencies, particularly targeting those that are high risk and the most vulnerable. We continue to undertake post-domestic incident response activities as a means of generating home fire safety visits and raising fire safety awareness after incidents in the community and to show visible support to those who are affected by these incidents. Deliberate fires. The figures for deliberate fires has reduced on the previous year, with only 1 incident this type in quarter 4. The fire was attributable to antisocial behaviour by young adults from out with Nairnshire. The lower incident figures relates to previous years. The lower incidence figures relative to previous years is welcomed, and we continued and were contributed to by lockdown restrictions and reduced public activity in the outdoors. Okay, special services. The figures on page 8 relate to special services RTCs shown an increase against quarter 4 for last year. The number of incidents of this type remain low, which is encouraging, and the service recognised that lockdown restrictions eased the volume of traffic on roads. This, however, is back to normal levels, and we will continue to work with partners to continue to educate the public on road safety matters. The 2 incidents recorded in quarter 4 were low level, with SRS involvement limited to making the scenes safe, so there weren't any extrications or casualty removals from these incidents. Unwanted fire alarm signals. The figures for false alarms are equal to the same period in the previous year. Across the whole year, a number of these have been repeated attendance at premises where buildings are unoccupied due to COVID working restrictions. Prevention and Protection have now recommended legislative auditing of premises and will continue to work with businesses to reduce unwanted alarms. The local managers regularly engage with the premises and business owners and continue to try to prevent these incidents occurring. Finally, station availability. If you look at page 10, you'll see our availability and current strength of personnel. These figures reflect the very good availability figures for the station establishment and the commitment of the local RDS staff. So many thanks for your attention and time, and if you have any questions now, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Roddy. Any thoughts, any concerns? The one thought that occurs to me, Roddy, going forward into summertime is wildfires.
Yes.
Last year we had quite a lot of those, not always in Nairnshire, and the Nairnshire boys were out all over the place, I think. Is there any special measures this year, or is it just ongoing attempts to educate?
It's ongoing, really. Prior to this meeting, I'm based in Aviemore, so I was at the local national park meeting there, and it's all about education and information and passing that on to the public. It's about kind of working hand in hand with the outdoor access code and limiting the damage of people on the countryside, and limiting the chances of us having wildfire. So currently we've got our spring thematic action plan within the fire service. We'll be moving to the summer one, which will be addressing such as barbecues, fire pits, and just that kind of good behaviour that we would hope and appreciate people would carry forward outdoors.
Yep, thank you very much. Peter, you have something?
Thank you. I was just interested to know, Roddy, whether you think the uptick in the domestic incidents in the last period was due to people spending more time at home during COVID?
I think that's been evident across the whole of Scotland. I think the ones I mentioned there were, I think there was a faulty electrical equipment, so maybe that could be attributed to be overuse. There's obviously negligence there as well, so and it's spread from an external structure. So maybe it is partly due to that, more folk being at home. Potentially, though, these incidents could have happened whether people were or were not at home. So it's hard to kind of make that determination really just from the limited information that we have there. But it's something that like we're saying, we'll be monitoring on there, and these figures feed into the national process and of our ability to assess and break down information, and any kind of localized trends will be addressed. But at this point, I don't believe that this is a cause for concern within Nairnshire.
Yeah. Just to come back on station availability, maybe. We've always been very lucky here in Nairn. The station availability has always been very high. Are we up at a normal establishment? You've got staff of 20 there, or are you actively looking for some more moment around Nairn?
Currently recruiting, yes. I've got a couple of people who are in the latter stages of application, and probably we're looking at a figure of about 21. We don't have a nominal figure that we work towards because the fire service offers contracts of availability. So currently it's 90 hours or 120 hours a week, there being 168 in the week, obviously. So we've got to recruit people so that we have the best availability that we can, balance that against the infrastructure that we have there and the ability to train folk. So it's a bit of a juggling act, but we're not quite there, I would say, but we're there or thereabouts. Just for your information, there's the terms and conditions for our RVDS retained and volunteer duty system. So the Nairn staff have been reviewed, and there's the potential that those on a 90-hour contract, or a 75% contract as we call it, the obligation will reduce to 80 hours a week there. So potentially I could have more vacancies depending on the number of folk who want to maybe adopt that contract to ensure a better work-life balance. So I think to be honest, Nairn's availability is good, and it's hats off to the lads and lassies that are there. They make an excellent effort in maintaining that pump availability as best they can. Obviously, with people working out with the area and travelling, to their primary employment, it does become a bit difficult there, and especially summer holidays and school holidays, etc. But I'm still recruiting. Long way of saying I'm still recruiting.
Yeah. And maybe this is an unfair question, and if it is, you can tell me. The demographic, you have a fair spread across the age range of staff. In some professions, I used to be in the teaching profession, and they were always moaning it was on average pretty old and people retiring. You have a reasonable spread across the age range?
Demographic, yes. The last people we have taken on have been in their early 20s, so that maybe that will drag the average down. In relation to the demographic split, we have one female on there. Currently, there's another one in the application process, but that's where we are with that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
No,
Anybody else got any thoughts or questions? No. Well, thank you very much, Roddy. As usual, we are very grateful to the professionalism. Even though they're retained fire persons, they're very, very professional, keep our community safe, give a great deal to the community. We're also very grateful to the management who make sure they're properly trained, maintained, and indeed kept safe themselves when they're running into a fire when everybody else is running out. Again, take our thanks back to the staff, tell them that we're very, very grateful for their role in our community, and also to yourself and your work. And we'll look forward to hopefully good reports in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
No bother, I will pass on your thanks. Thank you very much and cheerio.
Thank you. Right, folks, we move on now to our second one, which is a confirmation of a use of COVID funds. And this is from Emma, and it's just confirmation of a particular action that we took. Okay, Emma, we'll look forward to you.
Yes, thank you, members. So this report seeks agreement on the request by members to set aside a proportion of ward COVID funds for spend on outdoor recreational space. That specifically, the report seeks agreement for £1,470 to be allocated for the provision of grass cutting at the Old Farmers Show Field, and this is to enable the continuation of safe access to the site for wealth and wellbeing related activity. The current balance of ward COVID funds stands at £9,326.09, and that's a correction to the report, members. That is the current balance that stands at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody, any question or comment? No.
The only small comment I have, Tom, is it local government planning out in 1982, almost 40 years we've been cutting this grass. Now suddenly we're now trying to shed the responsibility for it or cut back, and I just think that's a bit unfair. We had a bit more control over finances locally. I think we would have tried to keep this thing going. Well, we'll just see what the future brings though. Thanks.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken. Is Peter?
I was just going to echo Laurie's thoughts. Grass has been cut for very many years. It is a recreational space in Nairn and one that is not provided by the council. Laurie correctly mentions the 1982 Act, where there is an obligation on the council to provide recreational space, failing which there is the alternative of paying for other people to provide recreational space. And in my view, this is something the council ought to be doing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I take both your points and I would agree with them. I have asked the Committee of Nairn St Ninians Football Club to give us a breakdown of the actual sporting activity that they undertake. There are some expansion around that. They are now including young girls, women's football. So it's a very, very inclusive activity. So that's a core activity there. And the Farmers Show Field is used extensively by people walking dogs and actually just walking through it from one part of Nairn into the centre of Nairn. Different times of the day. I think it's something that we as locally elected members will have a continuing discussion with officers and see if we can find some solution to that. This is a temporary solution. It occurred very suddenly at the beginning of the season, and unless we actually authorise the cutting of grass, obviously it would have got out of hand very, very quickly. So we took this decision, and this is really homologating that. So I think what we're asked to do is agree to allocate funding from COVID-19 ward discretionary funds to support the provision of grass cutting on what is now the old Farmers Show field in support of health and wellbeing activity. Are we content to do that, please? Okay.
Agreed.
Right. Thank you very much, folks. We now move on to, let me have a look. He said, we're moving now to our housing performance report, and we have David Wood with us this morning. Good morning, and we look forward to you presenting the report.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. Well, I'm pleased to present the housing performance report for Q4, which is the period covering January to March 2021. What I'd like to do is bring your attention to the salient points of that report. So if we start off with emergency repairs, excuse me, although quite consistent, the report shows a slight increase in the time taken to complete emergency repairs, out to 5.9 hours from 5.4 in the last quarter. This is primarily due to COVID and the additional safety measures that have been put in place during that period to ensure contractors' safety. That said, we're still well within the target figure of 14 hours. If we move on to non-emergency repairs, the figures show a slight improvement in the time taken to complete non-emergency repairs compared with previous quarters. The figure is 4.1 days, which is within the target time of 8 days. However, the focus, as you're well aware, has been on emergency repairs during this COVID crisis, and this has created something of a backlog in non-emergency repairs, which clearly indicates on the performance and may also reflect in future reports. That said, from the 26th of April this year, tradesmen have been allowed to enter people's homes, so hopefully this will help to deal with our accumulated backlog. Moving on to relapse times. Slightly over the relapse target of 35 days, standing at 35.09 days. Again, this can be attributed to the increased safety measures put in place due to the COVID restrictions. That said, relapse times still remain below the Highland average. Rent arrears, slight increase to the previous quarter. What we've done in this report is included another table, 4.1. We've included this table to illustrate the increase in universal credit cases against the same period last year. It highlights not only the increase in numbers, but also reflects the volume of universal credit cases that are actually in arrears. And this obviously goes, contributes towards the figure we see in the report. The officers in Nairn continue to focus on rent arrears. They're very proactive in contacting tenants, and they continue to offer advice and signpost towards relevant agencies that can offer help. That said, we've adopted quite a sympathetic approach because we do realise, as the tables indicate, that people are having a difficult time just at the moment. You may be aware, doorstep visits started on the 26th of April this year, and indoor home visits commenced on the 17th of May. Hopefully going forward, we'll see that these visits now impact on those rent arrears figures. If we move on to homelessness, 10 presentations in Q4, which is fairly consistent. The options officers who deal with homelessness, they continue to provide a great deal of homeless prevention and advice and signposting to agencies who can help. The capital programme The Housing Investment Officer, I think, will give a specific update at the ward business meeting for capital issues. And finally, if we move on to Appendix 1 at the back of the report, there are no red indicators, but there are 3 amber indicators. First 2 categories relate to rent arrears issues, which I think we've covered really. The third category, which is percentage of lettable houses becoming vacant in there, on further scrutiny, relates back to sheltered accommodation. We've actually had more sheltered accommodation becoming void than normal, and this accounts for the amber indicator on the report. I think that concludes the salient points, so I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, Liz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report, David. It was very good. I'd like to ask under section 6.2, when we're talking about the average relet times and the number of lets for Nairn and Codder for the whole year has been 64 houses that have been able to be turned around during that period. Yeah. And in a later on report, there's several statements have been made about there being no need for housing in Nairn, that there's not a big housing demand now. At last week's Housing and Property Committee, there was 458 people on the list for housing for Nairn and Codder, and it was a turnover of just 64 houses a year. I'd just like to get your view and your opinion on the housing need in Nairn.
Thank you for that, Councillor MacDonald. My view on that is that we don't have sufficient housing in Nairn for the demand. Certainly, my experience of working with the allocating officers is that they don't struggle to allocate properties whatsoever, and if there's a shortage in housing, it would be larger properties. We could allocate any amount of 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom properties that become available to us. Mm-hmm. So I tend to agree that the more housing we have available to us, the more we could use it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And are people waiting long times? I mean, obviously there's some people that are on the waiting list that are never going to be able to get a house. So do you know the average waiting time, or is that just not available?
I don't think I could offer you an answer on that, to be absolutely fair. There's so many variables in there. People need different size properties. People request various lettings areas within there, and they've all got slightly different turnover times. So there's no blanket answer to that. So any kind of stab I take at that could be misleading, and I would prefer to not to.
Yeah. Okay, but so thank you for your report. And I suppose the other issue that's worrying is the increase in rent arrears and universal credit. Yeah. But I realise, the staff will be doing all they can to support these people, and I'd just like to thank the staff for the work that they do.
Yeah. Now we're able to do doorstep visits and home visits again as restrictions ease. The officers can actually engage with the tenants a bit better. We find that face-to-face interaction brings positive results by and large. So I'm hoping that by the time we sit here for the next committee report, I'll have better news in terms of rent arrears, hopefully.
Yep. Anyone else? I think David, that as councillors we all get requests from people, or lobbied, or whatever, however you want to put it. I need a house, I need an improvement, I need this, I need that. Just this last week, I've had 10 different contacts from people within 7 days. And one of the things that I had forgotten or maybe overlooked in conversation with one of our local officers is in trying to allocate, it's trying to get the best fit, which is often not a very good fit. There's a family of 5, 3 children, 2 adults in a 2-bedroom flat, and there is not really an option to move them on to appropriate accommodation. We have people in Nairn who say we should be converting high street properties, and yes, that's an issue, but that's a kind of monochrome issue solution. I think your point there about larger properties, family properties, that kind of thing, and actually being able to give people choices. And I would agree that not just is there a shortage, but there's a shortage of appropriate housing, and the number of cases per week, and I tend to get quite a number of them, where people have family situations that can't be adequately dealt with the accommodation they've got. It could be disability, could be the size of the family, could be boys, girls getting to a certain age, etc. So I appreciate that the housing officers have a real problem, because there are times when they're allocating houses and they know it's not the best, not the ideal, but it's the best they have on offer. Therefore, I think I take your point that I think we need to find ways of finding a wider selection of types of property to allow people to have choices and not just shut down their choices because they can't get a mortgage, quite frankly. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any further contribution on that one. No, we're okay.
Yeah, I've had a few people as well contacting me, and the heartbreaking thing is, as councillors, there's not a lot we can actually do. It's you know, it's really down to their points to get and the support that the officers can give them. So it is heartbreaking situation for a lot of people.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to add a wee bit. Yeah, I've had spoken with the housing committee, and I've had a few people myself looking for houses. But there are a number of other problems here which are kicking in, and I think there's an unfairness in the point system, in the way that points are allocated. They used to allocate points for people who had long waits. I think it's a point a year. So after 20 years, they moved up the list. That doesn't happen anymore. Also, a bit of concern about homeless allocations, the way they're handled, and that sometimes we're ending up with situations where they're coming through from Inverness because they're kept in Inverness for long periods of time. They accumulate 200, 300 points, and suddenly they trump a house and they don't care where they live. They're quite happy to come to Nairn. And that means it stops the local people from getting the opportunity of even getting into the door. There's an ongoing problem. I have spoken to the housing committee, and they're going to come and give us a briefing on the point system. But I think it needs to be tweaked and updated as well. Okay, yeah. Thanks.
If I could just address that point that Councillor Fraser makes, there is, you may be aware that there's an ongoing exercise at the moment where the council are actually looking at the point system and ways to revise that point system to try and become maybe fairer and more consistent across the board. So that's been ongoing for quite some time, and it's gathering some momentum now. So you may well be consulted on that in terms of going forward once any decisions have been made. But it's been going on for some time, because I take your point absolutely that it altered some time ago when they used to allocate waiting time points, but waiting time points don't exist anymore, and that was replaced with local connection points. So again, those type of areas are being looked at, and we'll see what comes of that in the future, but it is an ongoing exercise.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that the housing officers do work very hard in Nairn to prioritise local people, and we've had that reported to us before, Laurie, that by far the highest percentage of houses is going to local people. I think it's at 9 out of 10 or something like that. 86% of housing was going to local people. Listen to me here.
Again, Councillor MacDonald, if we look at the last development we had in Nairn, which was the Lochloy development at Burnside, there were 29 properties there. Every single property went to a local person, all. someone who had a connection to Nairn. There were no outside allocations at all on that development.
Yeah.
Thank you for confirming that, David, because there's a lot of misinformation out there
Yeah.
going around, and I think it's important that we let people know that's the case, the actual facts.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for all that. I think it's all very useful. We know it's a very complex situation, and it is really upsetting when we know we can't resolve some of the more personal issues that are affecting people's lives, not for the better. And it's nobody's fault as such, it's the system we're in. And somehow, if we can find a better way or a way of improving the system, then that's all to the good. Okay, folks, are we okay with that? Thank you very much, David, for your contribution, your answers, and also your information. And I've no doubt we'll be hearing more about housing as we move forward over the summer and beyond, okay? But thank you very much. And we usually say, and it's not just a trite saying, that we do appreciate that our housing officers have a hard job, and it is difficult because they know what they would like to do on occasion, but often can't do it simply because there's not the resource there of housing or whatever. But we do appreciate they try their best on behalf of the community and people. So pass on our thanks to them as well, please. Okay?
I certainly will.
Thank you very much indeed for your report. Now, folks, we are simply, okay, thank you. We are simply asked to have a wee look at this. We're invited to consider the report, and that's all we're asked to do, folks. Are we okay with that? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Now we're moving on to Nairn Common Good Fund consultation. Proposals for the disposal of Sandown lands for development. Now this is something where we put out for consultation as a matter of principle. It has attracted certain responses. We have now a report here in front of us. Sarah is here. I think Alison is here as well. And Scott Dalgarno I saw appearing in the background there as well. So we have a fairly solid team of people who can give us good information. And if we have any questions or clarification, Sarah, what we are thinking of doing, and you may give us some advice on this, we are confining ourselves to looking at responses. There are some of the comments that have been made that we may wish to make comment on, but basically we're looking at responses, being content with them. Obviously the housing issue is one that has cropped up in the consultation, and we're accepting the report. We may have some comment, and then this then goes to publication, I believe. And we will then consider it more fully at our next meeting and come to an actual decision. So we're really looking at your responses to the issues that are raised and see if we have anything to say about that. Okay.
Yes, members, that's the case. It's quite an unusual way round to do it, and I included an explanation in the report to make that clear. Under normal circumstances, we would have perhaps had a bit more time. There would have been the opportunity to have given the responses to yourselves, members, to have a look at, so that if there was anything there that you wanted to add in response to any of those points that have been raised, they could have been included in there at the point then that the report came before committee, so that those responses were complete, including your comments, and then we're in a format to go forward for publication in the appropriate documentation, which is just limited really to the type of feedback and representations and responses. I'm very conscious that this document, and it's a very lengthy document, has come to you with very little time to allow yourselves to really digest and find out whether there's any points that you wish to add your comments to. We've done our best to cover all of the points that have been raised by the various members of the community, and there's been an incredible amount of input from people across a number of teams in the council to try and get that done. But I also appreciate that there may be additional points that you may wish to make. Under normal circumstances, we would be in a position to go forward with a recommendation or a decision, and then to be able to publish. If it was a recommendation to full council, those representations and responses would not get published until the matter had been before full council, because that's when the decision is made, and we would include it as part of the decision-making process. However, again, this is slightly different because we're asking for you to have more time to consider the contents of these representations, and whether or not that affects the type and the nature of the proposal, whether you wish to continue with the same proposal, whether there should be any amendments, and what the recommendations you may wish to make to full council will be. And we acknowledge that there's time required to do that. So I think I spent some time thinking about the best way to get the matter up and in the public domain. This has got a lot of public interest. They want to know what the representations are. They want to know what our responses to those representations are. And I think it would be unfair to the community to expect them to wait until September. Similarly, I would like to be in a position to publish responses that are as complete and correct as possible, and if at all possible, to include any responses that yourselves members might wish to make to that. So I would ask for some decision to be made as to when we should move forward with the publication of these responses. My feeling and my advice would be that it should be well before the September meeting, but you may wish a period of time to perhaps come back to me with any additions, members, that you may wish made to any of the comments that are in that document for inclusion pre-publication. And that's something that you might wish to discuss or consider this morning. I appreciate that that analysis document is an extremely lengthy document, and it's not the sort of thing that you can just read very quickly. It takes time. It takes time to digest the various points, and it will take time to consider if there's anything you wish to add. But I think, in all fairness, to the nature of the consultation, to the nature of the community interest in it, and to the need to get the information before the community as soon as possible, we need to make sure that is as complete as we can possibly make it when we go to publication with those responses. As I said, it's quite an unusual way round to do it. We've tweaked the process a little bit because of the nature of the proposal with Sandown and the nature of the public interest. And it's an opportunity to make sure that we take the time to get everything right as far as everyone is concerned. What I've done in the report is to go through the process of how we've done the consultation specific to Sandown. So it's not a general consultation, it's very specific to Sandown, to the position that we're asking you now to not defer a decision, but just take some time, but certainly to make a decision on the appropriate timing of the release of these responses to the representations that have been received. I think it would be fair to say they're being hotly awaited by most members of the Nairn community as we discuss it this morning. So I think we're all here available to answer any questions. And I think it's perhaps best just to put it forward to yourselves, members, to see if there's anything specific you wish to raise, and how best you feel that you would like this matter processing as far as public responses are concerned.
Yeah. Okay, Liz, Liz, you're okay?
Oh, yeah, just trying to get off mute there. Yes, Sarah, thank you for your report. And I think it's a very comprehensive consultation that you've undertaken, and it was a good extension to the period that was required. So I think during the pandemic, you've given as much opportunities for people to participate as possible. So I thank you for that. I was disappointed at some of the negative tone of the responses from the public, and the inaccurate and untrue statements that I've seen some of them have made, which you have answered very well. You've just said this isn't correct, or you know, I appreciate this, the way you've answered all the questions. But you know, several people have said that there's no housing need in Nairn, and it's evidence that there is. It's very clearly evidence. There's 458 people hoping to get a house in Nairn on the waiting list. There's been inappropriate comments made as well, which is just about opposition to social housing close to the golf club, which I think is quite appalling to leave something like that in. And the final point was the personal attacks on councillors in the report, not from yourself, obviously from members of the public. And on one comment that was made about myself saying that I shouldn't participate because I'm in the SNP now, I'm actually an independent councillor now, but your politics don't make any difference on how you deal with common good issues or council issues. And just to correct an untrue statement that said the land that I used to own at King Steps has got no affordable housing. Well, it has 29 council houses on it. Over 25% of the housing was affordable. And, you know, it's quite upsetting that people can just write something down that's completely incorrect and expect it to be published. When, you know, if you leave things written in that are completely untrue, then it makes them, you know, it just spreads the germ, doesn't it? So I thought it's disappointed from the tone of the public, and there definitely is a housing need in Nairn, and I think there was 64 houses allocated over the last year because of the development at Burnside and the increase in council houses that we had during that period, because usually it's a lot less than that. But anyway, I accept your comments that you've made in response to everything, Sarah, and that you didn't go into the detail of looking at the mistakes that had been written by the public.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, just a couple of clarifications. You're talking of a publication, but you've already published the report, is my understanding. It's on the internet, it's on the council website. So maybe you could clarify what you're talking about there when you talk of publishing. Secondly, yeah. Liz's point, I'll just deal with them. Liz's point on the personal attacks, I think it should actually be removed. It's quite unfair that personal attacks are put in against any councillor or individual. I think that they should actually be taken out. I have to remind everybody, housing is not the reason for selling Sandown. It's to realise an asset for the common good, not to put houses. That's a separate matter. That shouldn't come into consideration. I still have my views. I'm opposed to the selling because I just don't think it's the right time financially to sell. I understand where you're coming from with the report, but one option I thought of was hold a local referendum. You do postal votes for community councils. Why not do a postal vote for the disposal of Sandown? I think that might you get a better response. You have 180 responses out of 10,000, or what is it? It's 10,000 on the voters roll. Might be worth doing a referendum just to see what the views of people are. Keep it simple. It wouldn't be expensive to run because we do it all the time for community councils, and you get a genuine view from the people of Nairn rather than limiting it to a few who have been involved in Sandown over the last 20 years and just 4 councillors. I'm slightly concerned with the way we put over the need for housing. Yes, there is a need for housing, but in some respects, it was 360 houses, 360 names on the waiting register 20 years ago. Now we're at 480 or 460, but we built over 800 houses out to the east of Nairn. There's just something not too right. And I understand that as I sprays with a point system, there are some people in Nairn who just unfortunately, because of the nature of the point system, are never going to get housed, and that needs to be addressed as well. Sandown is bringing in income. It's only 5,000–6,000 a year, but it's still bringing in income just now. The other thing which I have picked up on over years is that, according to surveys, there's over 1,000 residents in Nairn work in Inverness, and therefore you could argue that Inverness should be building more houses to house their own workers rather than people travelling to and from Nairn to Inverness. I mean, I understand people might want to live in Nairn, but the reality is, if they're working in Inverness, maybe they should be. More people should be looking at Inverness, or Inverness should be looking more at the demographics of the housing need in Inverness. I think that's really all I've got to cover. Yeah, that's so much. Just carry on. Someone else going to go. Peter.
Sarah, maybe there are bits of that would be relevant, you know, about publication, etc. There are some wider issues there that we obviously have to discuss in a different forum. But if you want to start with the publication one and maybe anything else you feel relevant there.
Yes, I mean, it is correct. The report is a public report and the report presents the analysis. The report does ask you members to agree the responses to the representations that have been received. So the report makes it clear that whilst that analysis is published as an addendum, as an appendix to the report, it's published in a format that can still be amended by yourselves. So you have to agree those responses to the representations, because ultimately it's coming out as the consultation from the former borough of Nairn. So if there is anything within those responses that you wish to be removed or amended or changed, then that would be done before the document is published. And that's where I said it is slightly an unusual way round, that if you wanted time to go through all of those responses, say, and then come back within a set period of time and confirm to me that those amendments have been made, these are the amendments that you wish to have made, and then the document is published in that amended form as the formal responses to the representations document within the consultation, because all it is at the moment is an analysis providing you with that information. You still have the ability to amend those responses. And yes, it's always very difficult. I'm very conscious, and some of the things that I dwelt very hard on was whether we should be including some of the more inappropriate comments. I think if you recall, there was a request that we published everything verbatim, and that was going to be completely unworkable as far as the website was concerned in the way that we do our consultations for the Highland Council. So it was about getting the balance right and making sure that when it was released, people saw that we hadn't cherry-picked certain bits of information out of their responses, but we summarised it in a way that meant that people could check what we were including, but then to also make sure that we gave appropriate answers. And we did try very hard to make sure that if we felt that some of the things that were being included were inappropriate, we said that, and I'm quite prepared for that to be toughened up if members, you wish to highlight some of the areas you want that to be toughened up with, because, you know, it shouldn't be the sort of document for personal attacks, and under normal circumstances it would have been a far more summarised document, but we'd obviously had this request to have it as transparent as possible, and we've tried to meet that request in a way that we wouldn't perhaps normally, not that it wouldn't have been transparent, but we would have kept it exclusively just to the points that were raised in relation to the consultation and not the other aspects. But because of the requests that have been made to publish verbatim, we were sort of had our hands tied on that. The question, there are wider issues there. In fact, it was quite interesting sitting in at the housing report earlier to hear the type of figures that were being presented there. I mean, it may be that some of those figures be incorporated. There's clearly some housing need in there that is evidenced, and more than the people in the report, responses to the report, are saying. The question of the referendum is something that we would obviously have to have some further consideration about the viability of that, and what is the appropriate way forward if that's something that we wish to consider. That would take some discussions. So I think that's the way that we're at. And really, we just need to make sure that we have the document as completely as possible.
Yep. Peter, you have some points.
Thank you, Tom. I have one specific suggestion to Sarah. Paragraph 3.1 under the heading Implications. This states that any sale would represent a permanent reduction in the Nairn Common Good portfolio. A casual reading of this would indicate that there was going to be a loss in value of the portfolio. I would suggest that you reword this to show that what we are doing is exchanging one asset for another asset of an equivalent value. But going to the report and responses in general, I don't have any problems with what you have said by way of responses. One or two things might be amplified. There's one on page 34 when they talk about developer contributions. The direction of travel for developer contributions is that these will increase and increase significantly, and I think they should, because at the moment the developer and the landowner benefits leaving the local authority to pick up most of the capital costs for services, and it's not unreasonable that the developer and the landowner should contribute more. And the way the system works is that the burden would fall on the landowner. So certainly the developer contributions from Sandtown will eventually increase significantly and reduce the value of the land. And I think that's a point worth making. Moving on, colleagues have spoken about the need for more affordable housing in Nairn. Too many young people and their families are forced to move away from the town due to a lack of suitable housing. And if Nairn is to prosper, it needs a thriving young population. I looked up some figures over the weekend, and Scotland's population is aging, and aging more quickly than the UK as a whole. Over the next 20 years, the number of over 75s in Scotland is forecast to grow by 85%, while the number of taxpayers is forecast to increase by only 1%. You don't need to be a first-rate economist to work out what this would have for jobs, health and education services. And Nairn needs to do its bit and have a younger, more vibrant population. And Nairn can't allow itself to become a town dominated by pensioners. We need housing for young families. And I firmly believe that Sandown offers us an opportunity to do this. One point that appears to be missed by all the respondents is the opportunity cost of doing nothing. The income the Common Good Fund derives from the land at the moment is in the single-digit thousands of pounds. The current dividend yield on the FTSE 100 index on Monday was 2.69%. And this means that an investment fund of £10 million would have an annual income of over £250,000. So each year that the land remains in agricultural use, the Common Good Fund is foregoing a significant income which could be made available to support projects in Nairn. I was disappointed to see that there were no responses, as far as I could tell, from those who might be looking for affordable housing in Nairn. And I think this is one great drawback of the exercise, in as much that we have got responses from a distinct proportion of the local population, and not the one that would benefit most from additional housing. And I think we need to perhaps do a different exercise, as Laurie pointed out, something that would get a much wider response. So now I am happy that we're being asked to note the report with a decision at the next meeting. We're not being asked to decide upon any immediate sale, and all we would eventually be doing, if we are so minded, would be to move the process on one further step, which would be to recommend to the full council that we approach the Sheriff Court for approval in principle for any sale. So on that basis, I'm happy to support the report.
Mhm. Scott, I missed you earlier on. Do you have something you want to chip in at this moment, and then we'll come back to Sarah?
Yeah, I certainly can, and good morning, members. The couple of questions I was going to pick up on, if I could start with the comment there, Councillor Staggers, about developer contributions in particular. Obviously, that's been a key concern that's highlighted in a number of the consultation responses, what we have observed in responding to those questions is that the development plan flags what items are likely to be required for developer contributions, and that those will be refined through any pre-application advice process. But it's important to flag that the surveyors have also contributed to the response and flagged that any valuation and the valuations that have been provided to date include have factored in the likely costs for developer contributions already. So that has been considered as part of the advice that's before you today. And you're right that in principle those costs could ultimately affect the landowner in principle, as it would in any case. But of course that has been taken into account, and it's important to distinguish that from the issue that's been mentioned in the responses, which is we will be unduly burdened by the costs ongoing for developer contributions. That's not the case. Those will be reflected into the land value as they have been, and it will be the obligation of the of any prospective developer to deliver those obligations. So it's not that it's indirectly it's not directly affecting the landowner on an ongoing basis, if I can put it that way. Second issue, going back to Councillor Fraser's comment about housing need, is I guess I just wanted to flag it's been acknowledged that housing need is indirectly related to this specific consultation and this exercise, but since it's been mentioned in the responses and in the committee today, I feel it's relevant just to mention that housing needs have been confirmed and are being reviewed again through the housing need and demand assessment work that's underway at the moment, that's being attributed to the local development plan review, and it is flagging those needs that have been identified for the Inner Moray Firth area and for all of Highland. So the Inverness does and will continue to accommodate the lion's share of housing needs, relatively speaking, across the Inner Moray Firth area and across Highland. But there's also a proportionate amount and response to housing need across all Highland communities, and that includes Nairn. So separate to that, if it's considered that this site, if members obviously through this process, it will confirm whether the site is a suitable one then to be carried forward to the next stage of the Inner Moray Firth local development plan as a viable site. And the decisions that are being made here will ultimately lead through to that site being included or not in the Inner Moray Firth local development plan. But certainly it's in the adopted plan as an allocated site at the moment, with the acknowledgement that the land ownership issue is being resolved and it is being done, and that's taken place obviously through this process. So hopefully that clarifies those matters. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sarah, are there points you want to pick up on that have been raised?
I think I covered the points that I was due to pick up on by Councillor Fraser.
Yep.
The position regarding the Councillor Saggers regarding the permanent reduction in the common good asset register. Yeah, I can accept the point or the wording on that. What it means is essentially we can't add any common good property. We can't create any new common good property. The only way that we acquire any new property that is included in the common good asset register is by acquiring property as investment property. So, for instance, taking Sandown as an example, if Sandown were to be sold and advice was received that the purchase of another, say, property asset, as has been done in some other common good fund areas which have cash funds, but a good investment was to purchase another property, that would be purchased as an investment property and would be held as common good, but in a different way. It would still be part of the common good, but it wouldn't be part of the historic traditional common good. So the loss of Sandown as an asset, whilst we might well be swapping it, that's accepted for, say, a cash sum that would then be invested. It obviously represents a permanent reduction in the property assets, if you like, of the common good fund, in the solid, tangible, heritable property. And once it's invested in, however it would be invested, stock, shares, bonds, whichever way it's invested, it's then at the vagaries of the investment process, and it is investment property then. So it changes in nature slightly from what it is now. It's quite a difficult way to describe it. We're one of the few sort of funds that have had to consider the fact that we have property that's been purchased, for instance, since 1975. So that was where common good fund cash was used to acquire actual bricks and mortar property. So in the technical terms of common good, that would no longer be common good property, but obviously it's a swap of cash for bricks and mortar. So we couldn't lose that, otherwise the common good would lose. So it's quite a hard concept to get across, but it does represent a reduction in the solid stuff that you can touch and feel as far as common good property is concerned, even though it would then be in the investment portfolio as to how that would be invested, whether that then goes forward for investing in bricks and mortar or stocks and shares or whatever it is. And obviously any income earned from that investment, you're quite right, could then fall into the funds, and that income could then be used to support projects or to open up a grants budget or something like that in there, which at the moment isn't there. So yes, perhaps that needed to be made slightly clearer, and we can take that forward to the next report and clarify that a little bit more in the report that comes before yourselves in September as to what that actually means. Other than that, I think all the other points were covered by Scott. I don't know if there's anything else over and above that needs to be addressed.
If I just pick up what Laurie was saying there, we have two community councils in Nairn, both of which have an area of multiple deprivation within it. They have chosen not to consult their residents in that area, and I would suggest that could have been done, but it hasn't been done. We don't hear the voice of people from these areas in the responses. I go back to, and we've had this discussion in different places, the planning partnership, when it was being established, recognised that you can put out a consultation and ask for folk to send it back, even by post, and you don't get it back from certain groups of people. And you actually have to go out and find a proactive way of doing that. I think Scott himself, and Scott may want to come in and correct me, but he did say that doing consultations online have produced a higher level of response generally than has been happening, because there are people who would not go to a public meeting because there are people there with very loud voices and very forceful voices, who are prepared to respond online. So I would refute the idea that doing a consultation online in some way limits what we're doing. So I think we've got a fair response, but at the same time, perhaps there are people in certain areas of our community where we should take more serious account of their need when we are planning not just this consultation, but in other areas. I don't know if anybody else has got anything to say rather than me rabbiting on. I would maybe make some other points. I think you yourself at one point, Sarah, said that there was no real alternative being proposed, that people were saying, no, don't do it, but we were not being offered a solution, a way forward. We have a great deal about historical things that have been happening. Folk go back 400 years, they go back 10 years or whatever. We have a hang of a lot in here that's to do with the past. I prefer not to live in the past. I prefer to live for today and tomorrow. I think and I went to, I was up in Dornoch talking to people up there who have a project which combines with Common Good and Community Council and local councillors. We need a social enterprise group, perhaps, who might give us a project. If we're going to have a project around Sandown, then we need a vehicle to deliver it. We have a vehicle in Nairn which hasn't offered us anything. NICE is an enterprise group who might have been able to offer us something. Perhaps we could get another group to come forward, but we need shovel ready is how they go about it. We need folk to give us positive ways in which we can work in partnership with groups, the common good in addition to and in conjunction with, and I think that's a possibility. Solar power was mentioned. That can't be done in isolation. You can't have solar panels without them being connected to some enterprise. Folk have expressed concern about allotments. You yourself have pointed that out, and perhaps folks should note I do have 2 allotments out at Sandown, and the folk out there have expressed concern, but there is a degree of protection. I don't know if you want to add to anything I say about that, Sarah, but there's an area there that's not part of this consultation, and it's to do with land, etc. Eventually, we would have any future decisions would have to come back for other appropriate consultations. We're not just suddenly going to have a decision made and suddenly we go and do what we like. That is impossible. Infrastructure need, I think we have no evidence that that is going to be an issue beyond some other minor things. Developer contributions, I think that's been dealt with. One that disappoints me is conflict of interest. We have had very clear legal advice on this. We have no conflict of interest. We are acting properly and appropriately according to the Code of Conduct for councillors. There is a personal comment about me, which has been repeated by the same person now in 2 different forums, and I find that unacceptable, actually. I obey the Code of Conduct. I follow the Code of Conduct, as do my colleagues, and we would be ill-advised not to. We have very clear advice from all the people involved in this process, and I'm content that we have followed the legal process and we've done it properly and appropriately. And to state otherwise is, I think, to be mild, disappointing, but I think it's also totally inappropriate and inaccurate. I don't know if you want to maybe confirm things about the allotments, because 1 or 2 folk did make comment about that, Sarah, but there is a degree of protection around that, and that area is not part of the consultation.
Well, certainly, yes. I mean, it specifically states in the consultation document, and you have that in front of you again, members, because I attached it for ease of reference as Appendix 2. But we made it very clear that the allotments were excluded from the consultation, and in addition, not just the allotments, but an additional area of land for extension of the allotments. And we tried to make that very clear in any of the responses, that was included from day one, that the allotments were to be protected, that they're there, and that there's the possibility and availability of extension to that by keeping an additional part of land free from the consultation as well. So including that in the consultation document, I really didn't feel that we could be any clearer than to have it in black and white in the consultation document that they were not part of what was being discussed in the course of this consultation. We have responded to the representations made, and not just simply said it's not included. We've responded to them to try and assure people that there is a protection there for them, that they're not part of the consultation, so therefore we can't suddenly come along and say, actually, we've changed our mind and we're going to sweep them all up, because that's not how this process works. If we wanted to, we would have to consider that as a separate and side issue, and there's nothing on the table to say that they're going to be anything other than allotments. So we've done our best throughout, I think, to offer what assurance we can. But you can always understand when people get concerned. So all I can say again is that I've had no instructions from the outset to include them in any way in the consultation.
Yep, thank you very much. I don't know if any of the officers present have anything for clarification or a reinforcement of anything that you feel would be appropriate at this moment. Are we okay with that? Councillors, colleagues, we have had our say. Okay. Can I be quite clear, Sarah? If we are saying we're okay and we're coming back to this once we have had time to process everything, because we've only had this for I think about a couple of weeks or so, the full document in our possession. Are we deciding that we need to come back at our next meeting in the autumn, or do you feel there might be an imperative for us to try and think through, and Emma's still in here, so Emma may have something to say about this with us as well. Is there an imperative to have a special meeting through the summer months, perhaps the beginning of August, given that there is a degree of urgency in some people's minds that they want to see a final kind of publication of a document? Sarah, do you have any view on that that might help us a little?
I think it depends entirely on whether members, you've had the opportunity to read the analysis and in particular the contents of the table at paragraph 2b, and if you're content with those responses, and I've taken on board the fact that there are some that you're uneasy with, but if you're content with the responses to the representations that have been made, then we would ask you today to go forward with supporting those being contained in the formal document published within the consultation process. That's because I think the community are waiting to see something, and it's about not making them wait too much longer. Yeah. If you haven't had the opportunity or don't feel that you've had the opportunity to go through that document, and I appreciate it goes over 100 pages, then I think then we're in a position that we may need to come back for some sort of special meeting to keep this in the public domain, simply to authorise the publication of that document. Whether that addresses your recommendations to council or not, I think is a separate matter, and I think would probably be best answered by either Emma or Alison regarding the governance side of that, or whether that then on the recommendations for council go forward to the September meeting. My main concern at the moment is about getting the document with the responses within the public domain in as quickly as possible and in the best way that we can. So I don't know how much time you've had to be able to say completely today that you're satisfied and you would support that document. So that's the position, that's my position.
Right, so it appears to me, and my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong here, that there was a degree of correction from Peter, about the portfolio. I don't think there was anything else that is in any way, although we're uneasy and deeply disappointed about some of the comments, that in itself does not preclude publication of the document. I would I'm looking at what we're being asked to decide here. If anyone feels there's any amendment to this, I would be of a mind that we proceed as the outcomes that we're invited to agree to here at the end of the report without any amendment, other than if Sarah's content to say that she accepts that Peter had a point, and perhaps a clarification of that might be helpful. Apart from that, if we're content with the document as is, we can allow it to be published, but then we have to come back to make a decision in the autumn. Is that okay, Sarah, or am I off beam there somewhere?
Just to clarify, the comment about the portfolio was contained in the report. So I've made, rather than the actual document that would be published on the website. So that's in the report to which the document is attached. And I've noted that comment, and I would suggest that I take that forward, perhaps to offer a bit of a fuller explanation in any future report as to what I meant by that. Just to clarify that, rather than have it as a single comment, just to clarify what that actually means. But that wasn't contained within the representations and responses document.
I'll come back to you in a moment, Laurie. Are you content with that, Peter? You okay with that?
Yes, indeed, yes.
Right, Laurie?
No, just going to comment. I've only actually had one chance to read through this thing, the 100 page or whatever, it was 120 pages. So I would like to have a bit more time to study, but I certainly agree. We take out the personal attacks and the unnecessary bits in it, and just bring it back to the next area committee meeting. That'd be fine with me. You would have to specify what you would count as personal, because there's a great deal of repetition around councillors having conflict of interest. Now that was answered on one, the first time that I think that could stay in as a standard, but I think the individual personal attack should come out. I don't think it's right to individually attack councillors or delete the councillors' names. I just think it's wrong. Can I get some legal advice on this? Is it possible to take the individual councillors' names out? I don't know of anyone here, Kate. There's a couple of occasions. There's an occasion when Liz is quite specifically personally mentioned, and there's an occasion when I'm mentioned again.
Chair, I think redacting the names would be fine. I think removing the comments might not be, because of the potential for criticism that you're trying to pick and choose what comments you want to have published and which you don't. The difficulty is, of course, if people make assumptions on who that refers to, and that's tricky to a certain extent, because they might attach those comments to someone that it wasn't intended to apply to. But I do completely understand the point being made that it feels unreasonable for individual members to have their names referred to in some of the comments. But as I say, I think the difficulty is taking out the comments themselves could leave us open to criticism that we're picking and choosing what we want to include and what we don't. Yeah, okay. Liz, you're affected by this.
Yes, I mean, I don't mind about my name staying in, but I just like in the comments reaction from the council that something said that there was over 25% of affordable housing, because they're saying that there was no very little. I've not got that page open just now on my computer. Very little affordable housing, but there was 29 council houses built in that area. So I think it would be good to reflect that rather than the misinformation that's been put out there, which is completely untrue.
Could we be following up on that, Kate, in a subsequent when we come back to this in the autumn, we have the right then to introduce some clarifications there as well, given that at the moment it's kind of partial.
I think with Sarah's agreement, I think that would be fine, because it's about clarifying the response, making sure the response is factual. So I think, Sarah, if you're okay, that there shouldn't be any difficulty in just clarifying the response and adding some more detail into that.
I mean, part of what today's meeting is to see if there's anything like that, where clearly Councillor MacDonald knows those figures. She's got the information to supply those figures, which we didn't have at the time. So that's about being able to say, you know, we can add that into the report or the document before it gets published on the website. I can do that today. That's not a problem. So it's about being in the position where if there are any situations, members, where you have those sort of comments that need to be expanded on or that need adding in, they're done before we publish. And whether that's done before we publish today, tomorrow, next week, whenever, and whether or not you want me to produce an amended document and come back before a special meeting to say, yes, it's now in a format, or you want to have some time to read that document and come back before a special meeting and say, these are the comments that we want to add in, like the number of houses. We're not changing our responses, we're adding to them. We're making them more factually correct, which means then it's a better document that's before the public when we go to publish. I would be uneasy if we waited until September to publish that document, simply because we could just have not brought it before committee today. I mean, I know it's, you know, it's been a rush and it's been a hard job and it's been a lot of work, but this consultation did close at the end of February, and I'm very conscious then that a lot of time has gone past, so we need to be seeing to keep the momentum going as far as the council is concerned and the community is concerned. So it's about the best way to handle any amendments like that you may wish making to the document. So I've got a note of the information that Councillor MacDonald has shared. I can add that into that comment. I'll be able to find that quite easily, don't worry. But it's whether or not the rest of you and members, you need some time just to read that through and just say, well, actually, I know about this because I was involved with this at the time, and actually we need to add that information in, or whether you read it through and say, no, everything's all been covered. And it's whether you need to do that within a public meeting, and it's possible that that's the best way forward, and to keep it all transparent that you do. But it would need only possibly to be a short public meeting.
Yep. Well, the way I'm viewing this at the moment is the facts that Liz is referring to were actually mentioned in the housing report a little earlier on in our meeting as facts. So, I mean, that's okay. I think we have to be careful separating facts from the tone of some of the comments. Some of the comments may have a basis in fact, but I think some of the tone is different, and that's how people discuss things. Some people do it in a very aggressive manner. Some people tend to do it in a more neutral manner. Substantially, I don't see any other factual things that I would be overly concerned about. As far as my own name's concerned, I've been around here long enough. I don't think somebody casually mentioning me inappropriately is going to change that much. But are we? So with that proviso, which we've just discussed with Sarah and Kate, are you content, Liz, that we can go ahead as we are? Are we okay with that? And I would agree with Sarah. The sooner we get these things out there, and then we can come back in our own time and make a decision at the autumn meeting based on our time to reflect on this, perhaps gather more information, whatever. Okay? So we'll move to the recommendations, folks. Are we okay with that? Okay, let's move to them then. We'll take them one by one. The first one, very simple. We note the outcome of the consultation process undertaken as contained in the analysis at Appendix 1. We consider and agree the responses to the representations raised in connection with the proposal as outlined in the table at paragraph 2B of Appendix 1, and approve publication of the same on the council website, and notifying to those who have responded within the consultation. Now that's with the proviso of what we've just discussed about affordable housing and so on. Is that okay? So that's a slight addition that's gone in there, not an amendment, just a slight addition of factual information. The third one is agree to allow time for full reflection and assessment of all comments received. A decision on the outcome of the consultation will be considered at the next meeting of the Nairnshire Area Committee. So that takes us to our next meeting, okay? And finally, we note that given the value of the asset, the decision on the outcome of the consultation will rest with Highland Council, and members of the Nairnshire Committee will be asked to make a recommendation to the Council. That's a factual. Okay. Are we content with that, colleagues? We okay? Right. Sarah, you have had a winding road producing this. The period of the consultation was extended by request to give people full time. So I'm content that full time was given. You yourself have behaved very professionally in all of this. You have had additional questions asked of you around this. And again, you have dealt with them very professionally, along with the team around you. And we appreciate that very much. We appreciate this is this has been made into a controversial and debatable kind of process, but we appreciate all the factual support, information and so on background we've had. And we thank you for your work. Obviously, it's not quite finished yet. There will be a day when you don't have to waken up and say, I have to do some work on the consultation for Sandown. There will be a day when that will happen. I promise you, it will happen. But not yet, not yet. And we may need advice on any further actions that are appropriate for us as elected members, just clarifying issues, etc., prior to making a decision. But thank you very much for all your work. Thanks to your team. I know one or two people have been quite supportive of you, and sleep easy, and we'll see how we go. But thank you very much for this professional report. Okay.
Thank you, members.
Okay, thank you. And we now have an education report. We have Fiona with us somewhere, do we? Yeah, okay.
Morning, members. I think it's still morning.
Yes, it is still morning. And we look forward now to discovering what's going to replace the SQA, but never mind, we'll deal with that another day.
I don't know if I've got the answer to that just quite yet, but yeah.
That'll be another day.
Hot off the press. So the report that was submitted for you today, members, it's really just a generic update of what's been happening around the schools returning, following on from the period up until Easter when the young people were learning from home. So obviously, as you know, everyone came back after the Easter holidays. It was great to have our young people and our children back in our schools. In the 3-week period up to the Easter holidays, most children were working at home, some were in school, but everyone was back full time after the Easter break. We were working with schools and keeping parents and carers updated through our back to school website on the Highland Council website. And the focus to begin with was really around health and well-being. It was around reconnecting and socialising, just getting children back into school, getting to know them, building their relationships with staff, with their peers again, and just really linking back in with them. At the recent Education Committee, the plans are underway for our Summer of Hope. Miriam MacDonald's been working tirelessly with that. And we also are linking in with the community partners, third sector partners, and the plans. I think there's a website about to go live. There's information going on there this week around what's happening. Very much a focus of the school return was about outdoor learning. Schools have been making good use of outdoor areas, particularly as the restrictions were easing. The feedback from our staff was that it was great to see the pupils being back in. Pupils on the whole coped really well. There were some young people who needed a bit of additional support, and they were able to get that either through the school staff, support staff, or their guidance teachers. Some of them who maybe found it a bit of a struggle to come back after being away for such a long time. In terms of the lateral flow testing, that continues. It was extended to S1s when we returned after Easter. It's also been offered to our primary 7 children as part of their transition visits, which I believe were last week at Nairn Academy. And as far as I'm aware, they went well. But again, that is voluntary and nobody's required to undergo any testing if they don't wish to take part. I did put some information in the report around the deadlines for the SQA process, and as far as I'm aware, I believe the young people at Nairn Academy should be receiving information about their assessments today in their email accounts. So hopefully that will go well for all of them. And I'm sure that the school will be supporting any of them who need to discuss all of that. We also have had a stakeholder meeting since the last area committee around the new build for Nairn Academy, which is a really exciting process to be part of, actually, after some time talking about it. Mrs. MacDonald has been visiting some other new builds, and I know she plans to visit some in other local authorities as well, possibly in Murray, possibly in the Central Belt as well, just to get ideas for designs, what works well, what maybe didn't work quite so well. And she's keen to link in and get staff feedback and also the feedback from the young people in the school themselves as well, so that they can have an input into some of the design features or what they would want to see in their new building. So the next stakeholder meeting, I think, is due for early September. Obviously, schools finish this week on Friday, so they're gearing up towards that. Staffing is being finalised now for next session, and we're just looking. I think everybody is going to be needing their summer break. I would have to say our staff and our pupils and our families as well with the home learning. It's been a really difficult and challenging 18 months for everyone. I don't think we've ever needed a holiday quite so much as we need this one. And I know that they'll come back refreshed, ready for starting the new session. It's looking hopeful that the mitigations that are in place may be lifted when we return, but we won't know that until we get back. So the advice from Scottish Government at the moment is that we keep all the mitigations in terms of COVID-related situation in place at the moment. The thinking being that it's easier to remove them than it is to have to reinstate them. So hopefully, depending on how the restrictions change over the summer, we'll be able to issue an updated position statement to our schools, and hopefully some of those restrictions will ease depending on the situation. I'm happy to take any questions, members. I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, Fiona, thank you. Anyone, any thoughts? I was very forcibly reminded by a professional. When I became a councillor, I was accused of only thinking there was a Nairn Academy as an educational institute in Nairnshire. Just in general terms, how are our primaries getting on? I know this is primarily about the academy. The primaries coping okay?
Yes.
And we don't have. We keep getting all kinds of sideways swipes from people about schools being over full, etc., etc. The primaries are coping all right, number-wise, etc.
Yeah, and generally, in how they're coping, they've been. I follow all the schools on social media as well. I know Codder have been sharing lots of exciting things. They're involved with Farmer Jones for their outdoor learning. Aldern as well. I mean, Millbank, Rosebank. So yeah, they're doing really well. In terms of capacity, yes, there is capacity, particularly within. I would say Aldern's possibly quite full. I don't have the figures to hand, but certainly in terms of capacity, there is space within Rosebank and Millbank. Absolutely. Their numbers are probably lower than they've been sort of 5-10 years ago. So there's definitely capacity within the school buildings. But I need to speak to Housing and Property to get the most recent figures. I don't have them to hand. They're on the website for the school focus. Yep. But generally speaking, yes, that's fine.
Maybe. Oh, sorry, on you go.
Sorry, I was just going to say, in the new nursery at Aldern is opening. We're moving forward with. They'll all be delivering 11:40 from August. So that's all going really well.
Yeah, the early years is being delivered quite well in Nairnshire. By August, we should be in the right place. 11:40, by the way, doesn't refer to the time, just to make sure my colleagues are not thinking it should be 20 to 12 and we're off for our coffee. It's the number of hours. Maybe you want to explain that just a wee bit. But
parents are entitled to 30 hours a week, but they can take their hours throughout the year. So they can choose with some degree of flexibility how they take those hours. So it works out at 1,140 hours over the year.
Yeah. And is there any other intervention, maybe clarify what we're doing for early years in the different schools? I mean, Old Ern's got provision, Codder's okay. What about Millbank and Rosebank? Can you maybe just clarify for the colleagues what that is?
Millbank they've got a class within the school. We've also got Junior World. We've got First Steps as well as our partner centres. And in Rosebank, there's been some building work there in order to extend the rooms to be able to have capacity to deliver the 1140 hours as well. So that's all gone pretty smoothly as far as I'm aware. Old Ern's new nursery was opened just a few weeks ago. I haven't actually been up yet to have a visit, but I will be up there early in the new session.
Mm-hmm. So we're okay. We have a new school coming for the academy. We have some provision, upgrading and provision for the early years. We have capacity in our primary schools. So at the moment, we can be content that we're moving forward on a fairly even keel on the education front in Nairnshire.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah, we're okay with that. It's just that folks make varying comments, and I'm just wishing to again clarify and have more of a factual base rather than just folk making sideways comments without the base in facts. Peter.
Thanks, Tom. Do we have any recent news on the replacement of the synthetic pitch at the academy? We were told that it was due to be done in July, and we're almost into July now.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, it starts in July. That was the update we were given at the stakeholder meeting. I would need to check the minutes for the exact date. I think it was it the 5th, Tom?
Yeah, I think it's certainly in the first week in July or thereby. Robert still has it. Sorry, Peter, I could have maybe come in on that one. There was a meeting yesterday morning about capital investment programme, and it's certainly there for refurbishment, renewal. So I live in hope. As far as we're aware, the contract's there and it's ready to go. So hopefully we'll be okay.
Good. Could I follow up with a question on catchment areas? Are there any plans to look at the various catchment areas, bearing in mind the problems at Culloden Academy, development of Tornagrain, etc.?
I could field that one if you want, Fiona, and maybe if I fall short, you can maybe come in.
Fine, thank you.
Again, Robert Campbell, because of future planning, capital investment, new schools, etc., has been agitating for that. And I think within the next year or so, there's going to be a fairly full kind of look at this. There's going to have to be new school provisions at Stratton, possibly Tornagrain, and then a whole look at Inverness East. Now, revising the whole area or looking at the whole area of Inverness East will include Nairn, simply because, as you point out, Culloden is overburdened at the moment, and there's a whole lot of development going on in that area in the east side. And Julie, I think, I remember even 4 years ago, I think Julie, before her secondment, was agitating that Nairn should be included in any assessment of what is required in the eastern side of Inverness, simply because of our proximity there. But it's okay, we're going to get a new school, but if that had been promised before the new school was done, everything would have been put on hold till they got the reconfiguration of catchment areas. but as far as I'm aware, the review of catchment areas is at its next stage and about to be implemented.
We had also talked previously, this has gone back maybe 4 or 5 years, we had talked about looking at the catchment area for Aldern as well, and Millbank, because we were thinking in line with the new A96 coming in, because obviously with the housing at Lochloy, some of the Millbank catchment area and the Aldern catchment area now cross over. You know, I think some of them go through some of the streets that didn't exist previously. But we haven't progressed that statutory consultation just at this point, because it would probably make more sense once the new road is in place that we consider how we do that. It's also where the Millbank catchment comes up towards the Howford Bridge, towards the Codder catchment as well. It comes up further than you would kind of imagine, well, certainly further than I imagined when I first looked at that. But there's no plans at the moment for it. As Tom said, if we'd been undergoing any statutory consultation around Nairn at the moment, it would delay the build by a significant period. So we're pressing on with the school build just now.
Yep. Kate has spotted something in the council paper, so maybe if I can invite Kate in just to clarify this, is that okay?
Yes, of course, Chair. It was just to say that on page 36 of the council papers, which is part of the medium-term financial planning report, looking at the school estate, paragraph 9.4, right at the end, says a review of the role, pressures and funding streams across all schools in the Inverness area will be expedited to help inform the strategic approach, potential options and timescales for the priorities. As part of this work, a review of school catchment areas will also be undertaken. So there is that intention, but exactly as Fiona says, there's nothing actually being done right now, but it is part of that look at how school capacity needs to be considered across the whole region.
Yep. And I think also in addition to that, Robert Campbell, who's in charge of the school estate and planning, capital, etc., he has been talking about that for quite some time, and the need to marry together a review of catchment area, capital investment, where your schools have to be. And I think we've now moved to that position in the council, and as things go forward, that kind of integrated planning, which maybe has not been as obvious as possible, is going to be in place. So that maybe answers your question, Peter, I think, taking account. And Nairn's going to be part of that. I mean, I'm part of the executive committee that meets weekly, and it was made very clear that Nairn should be included as the eastern side of Inverness and a definable catchment area, whether we start looking at Croy, Ardeshir, etc. But that's for another political battle another day. Are we okay with that, folks? Any other thoughts when Fiona's here? Well, again, Fiona, thank you very much. I'm not going to mention that dreaded word, which I mentioned another time. We had a meeting and it triggered...
that dreaded word's already on the go, actually.
Yes, I know. The COVID in Nairn Academy this morning. But thank you very much for all your work. I know you've been working very hard, and during the lockdown and during the period, all the education people have had to be very flexible, very resilient, I must confess, trying to make sure the best is done for the young people and indeed for the staff. I mean, the staff and the pupils, and creeping out from that, families, parents, people who've been affected. It's had a tremendous effect across all our families and young people. And you guys, I think, have done very, very well. I mean, I think some of the work that has been done in Highland has been recognised nationally for some of the bits and pieces that you guys have done. And I think that's to be commended. Hopefully you can have a summer holiday at some stage. I know you're not allowed all the big long holidays that teachers used to be allowed. When I was a teacher, it was wonderful. We used to watch guys like you going into work. But quite seriously, very seriously, I know you work hard. I know your colleagues work hard. And We have exciting times ahead. We've got the early years moving forward. That's a whole different ballgame. We've got the primary schools hopefully on an even keel, and a new Nairn Academy to plan, look forward to, and get excited about. So good times in Nairnshire, and thank you very much for your contribution, Fiona.
Thank you all members.
Okay, thank you. We're asked folks simply to note, let me have a look here. We're invited to scrutinise and note the contents of this report. We're content with that? We okay? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you.
And our final one is minutes. Circulated noting the minutes. We're content with them. Could I say thank you for your presence, Kate, and appropriate advice at appropriate times for a somewhat inexperienced young man here, or old man, sorry, I got that bit wrong. And I see Emma's there, Alistair's there. Thank you guys as well for your attendance with us. Obviously, as elected members, we have a meeting next Thursday, an informal meeting to look at aspects of planning. Can I just say that Emma, as our new part-time, I don't know if you're part-time, our new ward manager, I should have welcomed you actually. That's dreadful. I should have had that written down. My apology for that, Emma, but welcome to your first meeting. There have been some significant things to talk about, and we are delighted that you're moving forward, making yourself aware of what's going on in Nairn, and we look forward to working with you in the time that lies ahead. So hopefully you're not too adversely affected by this meeting, and that you'll come back another day.
Not at all, and thank you for the welcome, members, and thank you. I'd like to extend to the community as well, who welcome me very much. So it's very appreciated, and I look forward to my work with the area. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay,
we won't mention your capacity as a road crosser, but never mind. That will not go away, Emma. That will not go away.
I'm sure it won't.
Don't worry. And Alistair, you are reminding me that I switch off the recording before we go. Is that okay?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Are we okay with that, folks? Okay.
Yeah.
We shall meet again. Okay. Bye just now. Bye.